Richard Seymour. So, Mike, you wanted to talk about Richard Seymour. I haven't heard anything about this. Go ahead and explain to me like what's going on with him.
Absolutely. So 2 years ago, the Raiders are looking to hire a GM and head coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it ends up becoming Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler. The team of people that led the charge in finding the head coach and GM and interviewing them, right? Obviously, it was led by Mark Davis. I want to say along with them was Ken Herrick, Tom Delaney, Marcel Reese, who at the time was essentially Mark Davis's consigliere, just his right-hand guy, former player that he grew a special bond with. I forget his exact title at the time, but he's no longer with the franchise like that. And there may have been one other guy. So I was curious. Now that we're in another hiring process, what the team is or what that group is that is leading the charge in interviewing, finding, and eventually giving the job offers to the coach and GMs, right? And that interview panel consists of owner Mark Davis, president Sandra Douglas Morgan, who was hired after Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler, new president for the team. But she's been here like a year or two, so. Board member Larry Delzin, senior vice president, I think that's what SVP stands for, director of football administration Tom Delaney, advisor Ken Herrick, and former player Richard Seymour. Now, here's the other thing you have to bear in mind. Everybody thought Tom Brady was going to be a part of this. According to Deshaun Reed on Twitter, no Brady. So, I don't know. I find it interesting. I remember in the offseason we had an episode on the podcast where we gave like our top 5 favorite players of all time on our respective teams. So you for the Niners with like Frank Gore, Colin Kaepernick, whoever. For me, it was like Khalil Mack, Max Crosby, Derek Carr, whoever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Zach Miller. Well, one of the guys I was definitely considering for that list was Richard Seymour, one of my all-time favorites. And I guess the whole point to this, really, it wasn't really Richard Seymour. It's more of just getting the names of the people in charge of this hiring process out there, because that's always been something curious to me. It's not just Mark Davis. It's a team. It's a team effort. They're coming together, talking about it, figuring it out. It's not just Mark Davis, judge, jury, executioner,
Mm-hmm.
So Richard Seymour is interesting to me, though. Recent Hall of Fame inductee, and actually was at the last game against the Broncos at home, was in the locker room and everything with like Marcus Allen and Ted Hendricks, Jim Plunkett, Charles Woodson, yeah. Which Charles Woodson, actually, I would have considered or thought that he might have been on this team too, but he's not, because I see him sitting with Mark Davis a lot. But I just, it's interesting to me. And I saw a lot of fans complaining because they're like, oh, really? Another former Patriot?
Mm-hmm.
I understand that for Tom Brady because he was never a Raider, right? Richard Seymour was a Raider, and he was a damn good one, even if it was just for 2 or 3 years. He was great. I looked at his Twitter account, and he said, I believe he's a CEO. I don't know what the company is, but if he is a CEO of a company, then I can understand why maybe he's a part of this process. Other than being a great defensive mind, he also has a grasp on leadership role, right? With whether you want to call it corporations or what. But I don't know. At the end of the day, I find that curious that he's the former player that they have helping the charge for finding the GM, finding the head coach, and no longer Marcel Reese.
Yeah, I do find that interesting too. I know that somebody who is in a very similar position that was also like kind of um, included in our list for like top favorite players of all time for our respective teams. Frank Gore. I don't know what position he has in the front office, but I don't think it's that uncommon for like uh, players who have at least had a good tenure with a team to be retained. Like if you look at the Warriors, I think the Warriors retained Zaza Pachulia, and he's still involved with like whatever roster dynamics that they do. So it's not just an NFL thing, but
Right.
that definitely is interesting.
Two more things, actually. There's two tweets that I sent you that revolve around this. If you can pull them up really quick. One's a statement from Richard Seymour. It's probably like the fourth tweet down, or third of all the recent ones that I sent you.
Okay, the third one down. So it says
it's
Ian Rappaport.
No, it's from Richard Seymour.
From Richard Seymour.
Well, okay, all the way at the go all the way up to the ones that I recently sent you.
Jesus.
Third one down.
Okay. Okay, got it. All right, I'm gonna pull it up right now. All right. Do you want me to read this or?
Well, if you could put it on the screen, honestly.
Yeah, I have it on the screen. Do you see it?
Oh, I don't. Now I do.
Okay, cool.
At least, do you see it?
Yeah, I see it.
There we go.
Okay.
But yeah, go ahead and read it.
All right. Richard Seymour says, I'm humbled by and grateful for the trust of the Davis family and Raiders organization, and excited about the opportunity to help build the Raiders' extraordinary legacy. When I was a player, Mr. Davis and the Raiders afforded me possibilities that I could never have imagined. And what I've learned is with this privilege comes responsibility. The responsibility to be a good steward of this organization, values for our team, for our community, and for our game. Once a Raider, always a Raider.
And then the last one I'll have you put up for now is the top tweet that I sent you. It's a picture.
Okay. The top one.
Yeah, that one. And this photo was actually taken today at a Martin Luther King parade, I believe, in Vegas. So
that was today?
That was today. And they're all wearing Raider gear.
So, yeah, Antonio Pierce is definitely coming back. So is Champ Kelly. It's like unofficially official.
That's what it feels like, and obviously we can get into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but let's start with Max Crosby. Are we ready to move on?
Yes.
All right. Mike, what do you want? Where do you want to start with Max Crosby? Because there has been a lot of interesting news about Max Crosby lately, as it pertains to this head coaching, candidacy.
Yes. Well, before we get into his, I guess, thoughts on the coaching candidacy,
mm-hmm.
Okay. Obviously, he has his own podcast. I don't know if it was on his podcast or on somebody else's, but I want to say it was his, where, he really gave his thoughts on Antonio Pierce and all of that. But he also announced, and I could be wrong, it could have been this past Wednesday, but I want to say it's this upcoming Wednesday in 2 days. He is scheduled to have surgery on his knee and his thumb. Obviously, he played through that for almost half a season, needing surgery on his knee and his fucking thumb. So, again, I'll never question his drive, So, with that being said, now we can get into the Antonio Pierce talk.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, right here, he says, I've been very vocal about who I want, that being AP. The guys in the locker room feel the exact same way. So if I got to be the bad guy and say it in public, so be it. I just sent you a tweet, or is that? Yeah, go ahead.
Why do you feel
It's
so
the
strongly about
tweet. Is it cool if I jump to the video?
Yeah.
All right.
Antonio Pierce? Because I know what we do on the outside and chasing it. We're huge Antonio Pierce fans, but what are your thoughts on him, man?
Yeah, he's incredible. From day one, he was straightforward with us. He's like, listen, I got 10 weeks. I'm playing with house money, and I'm gonna be 100% myself. I want you guys to be 100% yourself, and we're gonna change this thing around. So we literally did that on the drop of a hat. We all bought in on what he was preaching, and you just seen the turn. Not only our offense got better as the games went on, but our defense took a massive leap, and that's a credit to not AP, but PG, Pat Graham, and just everybody involved, in that process. So just seeing our defense go from one of the, bottom of the league, basically, to start the year and ending the year being a top 10 defense is crazy. So, for me, I've been very vocal about who I want, that being AP. And it's for a reason. I've been a part of a lot of turnover, a lot of change. And I want to keep building off of what we've done. It wasn't perfect. We went 5-4, but we were in every single game. And just to break that up and start from square one again, that's something that I'm not interested in. I want to keep building up what we're doing because we have something special going. And I know the guys in the locker room feel the exact same way. So if I got to be the bad guy and say be public about it, then so be it. But I just want to win. Literally all that matters under the Raiders.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What do you think, Mike? What do you think about it?
I think you have thoughts, right? You've been kind of coming into this with a.
Well, I have been coming into it because just the other day it was reported that, was it a report or was it a rumor that Max Crosby would be exploring his, a trade if Antonio Pierce is not retained?
Right. Yeah, I believe that was Ian Rappaport. There was a day, maybe it was Friday night. It was tweeted like, Max Crosby has drawn a line in the sand with Mark Davis on who he wants, and that's that's Antonio Pierce. And everybody kind of read into it like, drawn a line, like, is he giving him like a, end all be all sort of ultimatum? And then the next day it was like they really went in on it. Like, yeah, so it kind of sounds like Max Crosby will entertain the idea of a trade request if Antonio Pierce is not the guy.
Mm-hmm. Let me see if I can pull up Rappaport's tweet on it.
That should be from Rappaport, yeah.
Okay, Ian Rappaport. Max Crosby. Because the way that Rappaport made it seem is way different than what it sounds like on that podcast. By the way, the podcast was it was from the 33rd team. So go follow them on Twitter. And, I guess they have a full video that you guys can check out too. I'm looking for Ian Rappaport's tweet about Max Crosby.
I've got this one from Vic Tafer. Keep looking for Rappaport, but from Vic Tafer, he says Max Crosby on the Pierce decision on his own podcast. I think it's called The Rush. I want to be a Raider, but if we go in a different direction, there is nothing that is off the table.
Mm-hmm.
So that's his way of kind of hinting, but not announcing like I will request a trade. But that is the talk, obviously, coming out from the reporters. And then Vic Tafer actually puts a second comment in saying, Max Crosby on the decision to hire McDaniels over Bazakia. We fucked it all up. So that's Max's thoughts on Bazakia.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what I do want to say is that Max Crosby, if he really is going to draw, a line in the sand, like, Antonio Pierce is the guy or I'm out. Mm-hmm. I don't think that it's really, it's not Max Crosby's business to go find a head coach. Like, I understand wanting to support your guy, but when you signed your contract, it wasn't even under this guy that you signed the contract for. It was under the presumption that you would be with Josh McDaniels for the next couple of years. And then the Raiders decided to part ways with Josh McDaniels. And then so now you've had Antonio Pierce for about 9 games. And yes, Antonio Pierce has done a good job. I don't think anybody's denying that Antonio Pierce did a good job. I think that possibly we're looking at Antonio Pierce's job through rose-colored lenses because of how it was, kind of in contrast with what Josh McDaniels was doing. But to say that you're not going to be a Raider anymore if they hire a candidate that is potentially better, I just think that it's, we've talked about bad business before. I think that's bad business because it just makes it awkward if the Raiders do get a guy. Like, I'm just going to say it. I think Jim Harbaugh is the best coaching candidate that the Raiders could hire. The Raiders would be insane to just let Jim Harbaugh go to the Chargers, and then your division is full of, or consists of Andy Reid, Jim Harbaugh, Sean Payton, and then if the Raiders just settle for Antonio Pierce and then don't even try to acquire Jim Harbaugh, you're going with a guy with only 9 games of experience under his belt and only 1 win against a playoff team. And you're going against 3 guys that might, when it's all said and done, be Hall of Fame coaches. I don't think that's a recipe for success for the Raiders. And so Max Crosby, I understand you have more say in what the Raiders have to do than any fan, any player. This is your team. This is Max Crosby's team. And I get that you're vocal about your guy, but when you signed your contract, and I think he's under contract until 2026, right?
Sounds about right.
When you sign your contract, unless there's something in that contract that I don't know about, I'm pretty sure that you signed it to be an edge rusher. And I am in no way saying that he shouldn't have some sort of say.
Shut up and dribble.
I'm not saying shut up and dribble. Crosby can have an opinion on it. But to say he's not going to honor his contract and play for the Raiders if they don't get the guy that he likes, to me, I don't like that move.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, what Crosby is doing is he's using whatever leverage he can, right? He's under contract, so the only thing he can do is request a trade. But here's my difference between, I forget already what you called it, but bad business. I think bad business is like, I don't remember the exact terms, but Devin White with the Buccaneers requesting a trade because he wasn't getting the playing time he wanted or something like that. Like, that's him saying, oh, you're not treating me the way I'm supposed to be treated. I want out of here, Whereas Crosby, what he's saying is he wants continuity. He's played for continuity. He's played for 4 or 5 seasons, and he's had 4 or 5 head coaches, defensive coordinators, right? He wants the guy to stay in, implement, continue that implementation, succeed, grow, prosper, right? That's what he wants. He doesn't want another rebuild. That's what I was saying weeks ago, months ago, maybe 1 week ago, is like the fear I have with Harbaugh is if things don't work out immediately, which, let's be honest, the offense isn't set up to just work out immediately, right? Maybe it can under him. Maybe he can get that right quarterback. It's like Baker Mayfield. They just beat the Eagles right now, apparently. You get the right veteran, you bring him in, he just works. He just clicks, and it all works out. But if Harbaugh comes in and replaces the defensive coaching staff, that changes. Yada, yada, yada. At the end of the day, I agree with Max Crosby to the extent that I just want continuity. That's what I want. That's what I've been saying. That I think you see Antonio Pierce come in, and the defense clearly got way better. They played way harder. The culture, it was palpable. It was obvious. that the culture grew and got tighter and better, right? Under Antonio Pierce.
Mhm.
He let the guys be themselves. I mean, you heard all that stuff about like, player-led team, all this stuff, but I think again, I've been very vocal on Patrick Graham and, the success, being in part majorly from him. There was a tweet, I believe, from Chashawn Reed about Patrick Graham, essentially, or it might have been Ted Nguyen. Basically, it was an article kind of going into Patrick Graham and like his defensive scheme and how he runs it. It's not like he's pulled his scheme from different places that he's come from. His scheme is simply what is the personnel? What is going to work the best? It's versatile. It's adaptable based off of who is the best guy for the job and what is the best, I guess, job for that guy, right?
Mhm.
Their defense is adaptable, and clearly we saw it work out like insanely well because all I've known this defense to be is the worst pass defense in the league. And this past season, it took only half a year to turn it into a top 10 passing defense. That's impressive to me, and I feel like that's what I want to keep because if I'm being honest with you, I think offense is easier to fix than defense. At least from my experience, I've seen the offense go from dog shit to Derek Carr to, oh, wow, 2016. Really good. And then back down, but then back up, right? Under John Gruden. It's like that can be done. Defense, I've seen it year after year after regime suck because it takes years to implement a defense. Patrick Graham has made it very easy for his players to succeed, and that's obvious. You add in the culture and everything that Antonio Pierce has done. He's a big time leader of men, right? I think the world of Jim Harbaugh. I think that he also leader of men, right? He instills confidence in his players. I think Antonio Pierce does too. Yes, Jim Harbaugh has more success, but also yes, I think if you bring in Jim Harbaugh, you're running a lot of risk. You're running a lot of risk, and the same can be said about keeping Antonio Pierce. But to me, Jim Harbaugh comes in, the players don't know him. He also will probably want full control of the team. And when we get into the GM and head coaching talk, because we're going to, I'll talk a lot more about Harbaugh. I can't help but think that Antonio Pierce provides this ability for the team to be very fluid and the communication to work really well. I think that was something that Crosby was very big on was, hey, Antonio Pierce came in and his communication was like off the charts, absolutely off the charts. And I think, you pair him with a good GM and a good offensive coordinator and hopefully a good quarterback and you keep that defense, to me, that should line for success. And I understand everything about Crosby saying, oh, I'm going to demand a trade. Again, I think that's just him using his leverage. I don't think he'll actually do it. He might, but he's also under contract, and the Raiders will probably tell him, yeah, we're not doing that, dude. We're not going to trade you.
Mhm.
But I think him doing this probably does send a message to Mark Davis in that group. And they probably go, man, I mean, the locker room really feels this way. And I think the other aspect of this is the other guy I mentioned earlier, Rich Bisaccia. Crosby's already gone through this before. He's already gone through this, and then who do you bring in? The guy with all the awards, all the Super Bowl rings, right? And what does it do? It sucks. Absolutely sucks because he starts everything over again.
Mhm.
Well, actually, he waited a year. He had Carr, he had everything. Then it was like, well, let's get a different quarterback. Garoppolo sucks, right?
Mhm.
It was horrible. So
Mhm.
I think when you compare Bisaccia, who all the team wanted, he was a locker room guy, and it turns out like, yeah, that probably would have been better. And now Pierce, who had a winning record, taking over a team that looked completely lost. I mean, when the week of the Lions game, after the Lions game, we had our podcast, and I said, I don't want to see Jimmy Garoppolo anymore. And I said, this team has lost its identity. With Antonio Pierce, within 3 weeks, they got it back. Within 3 fucking weeks. Now imagine giving him an offseason with a general manager that he can work with, whether that's Champ Kelly or somebody else.
I don't think they got their identity back. I think that they found an identity under Antonio Pierce because they did not have the same identity at the beginning of the season. I feel like every year each team has to find their identity.
100%. But the reason why I say they got their identity back is because this is another reason why I love Antonio Pierce for the Raiders. He is a Raider. He embodies the Raiders. That picture with him, Richard Seymour, and Champ Kelly, they're wearing Raiders bombers. Like, that's just the most Raider thing ever, is being out in public wearing a fucking bomber. Like, I always wear Raider shit. Anybody that knows me knows that. I'm always wearing my hat, right? This right here, this is a rarity. It's usually Raider stuff. That, to see a coach do that, that's just cool to me. And then after every game, he's yelling Raiders. Like, he knows it. He knows it all. He is a Raider through and through. And he brought that to the team. So now the entire team is bought into that, of like, this is the fucking Raiders, dude. I'm a Raider. Like, I'm going to go win because I'm a Raider. Just win, baby. Like, they are bought in. Not just to him, but through him, they are bought into the Raiders. Whereas Josh McDaniels, buy into me, the Patriot way. It's like, and then you had the rumor about, him saying, don't talk about the Patriots like that to Antonio Pierce. Like, that's not the Raiders. That's Patriots West. How are guys going to buy into that?
Now, real quick, we'll continue talking about Antonio Pierce in the next topic because we're going to focus just solely on Antonio Pierce. But to wrap it up as we're pertaining to Max Crosby, I just want to say, like I said, Crosby, you are more than welcome to express your opinion. What I don't agree with is saying that you would like to be traded if it's not your guy. And I understand that you're just, like Mike said, you're using your leverage, using every leverage that you can. But I just think that if you are serious about being traded, like, you signed that contract to be loyal to the Raiders, not to be loyal to Josh McDaniels, because, when he left, you didn't say, oh, well, this is bull crap. That was the coach that gave me the contract. You weren't, I think that you should be supportive of the Raiders trying to do whatever's best for the organization. And even if that doesn't line up with what you think is best, it might end up being the best thing. But let's go ahead and talk about what Max Crosby thinks is the best thing, and who Max Crosby thinks is best for the Raiders. Let's talk about Antonio Pierce. At first, I wanted to call this topic like the AP obsession, because I kind of feel like the Raiders players have been hyper fixated on it's Antonio Pierce or nothing. And, I feel like we kind of split it up into two different topics because, we talked about Max Crosby a second ago and how he's like, well, I'm not going to play if it's not for my guy. I just want to kind of go over a couple things about Antonio Pierce. And I already said a couple things. I think right now the top coaching candidate on the market, even including Antonio Pierce, because he's technically on the market, I think the top candidate is Jim Harbaugh. The guy who just won the national championship at Michigan, the guy who has been successful every single place that he's gone and has a ton of connections in the NFL. And I know that might scare a couple or a few of you Raider fans out there because you're like, well, Gruden had connections, Josh McDaniels had connections, right? I feel like Harbaugh, at least in recent memory, in the past decade, has had nothing. Well, actually, more than a decade, has had nothing but results. He brought up Andrew Luck. He completely reversed Alex Smith's career. He developed Colin Kaepernick. he led the 49ers from a team that was poorly coached under Mike Singletary to a team that was in the NFC Championship in 3 straight years and went to the Super Bowl in one of those years. The list goes on. You let that guy go to one of your division rivals, just like, all right, we're not even going to entertain that just because our guys are having a revolution in the locker room, and it's Antonio Pierce or nothing. Antonio Pierce or I don't want it. I went through, and I was very curious because, we can kind of get lost in the whole Antonio Pierce was an upgrade over Josh McDaniels, and he was. But I don't think Antonio Pierce was bad. Really, there were a couple things in certain games where it's like, all right, he's a rookie head coach. He hasn't been a head coach at the NFL level before. Clock management. There are even I even get upset with Kyle Shanahan's clock management. And I'm a 49er fan. And Shanahan's been head coaching now since 2017. And he's been like observing head coaching since he was a kid. But I went through and I took a couple notes because I was really thinking about this. My pick is Antonio Pierce if the Raiders cannot land Harbaugh. But to say that Antonio Pierce is far and away the best candidate is inflating what he actually accomplished. Out of Antonio Pierce's 5 wins, only one of them was against a playoff team, and that was the Chiefs. And I think we can all agree that the Chiefs, while yes, they're the reigning Super Bowl champions, I don't think that they are one of the strongest playoff teams this year. I don't think that they're a top 2 team in the AFC this year. Right? I think that the Bills and the Ravens are 2 of the strongest teams left. And we'll find out this week because the Chiefs are going to be playing the Bills in Buffalo this week. All right, so only 1 win against a playoff team out of the 5. Out of his 4 losses, 2 of them, so half of them were against non-playoff teams. And one of those losses that I'm referring to was a must-win game to keep playoff hopes alive. So, the game I'm referring to is obviously the Colts game, where if they were going to have any shot to get into the postseason, they had to win that game. They dropped it. The other game, they didn't score a point. So they they lost 3-0 to the Minnesota Vikings, who also were not a playoff team. The Raiders now have an issue on their hands where the players have decided who they want as their head coach and have made it very public. Antonio Pierce deserves credit for having his players finally being happy. I do think that he deserves credit for building a culture in the locker room. But do you remember a couple weeks ago, Mike, where I said this is you give the players full control and it's a slippery slope?
Right.
I think the players are all bought in too because they have freedom. They don't want order. I think the natural thing as human beings is that we kind of oppose structure. Especially in America, I think we like to embrace the fact that we're the land of the free and we want to be free. And Antonio Pierce absolutely embodies that. It's this is a player. I think one of the things that he said in his introductory press conference was this is going to be a player-run team. And it really has been ever since day one. Remember, I made jokes about them taking their shirts off and blah blah blah, smoking cigars and everything. It is really, it's almost become a reality, but not to the extent that I was sort of like talking about. You mentioned Rich Bisaccia. I always struggle on that because I don't know the actual pronunciation. I need to figure that out so that way I'm actually prepared to say his name on the show. But he was brought up also by Max Crosby on how the Raiders dropped the ball on not retaining him. But I was kind of curious too on what his record was as the interim coach. So you kind of like think about comparing the situation that he had versus Antonio Pierce. So Bazakia had 5 wins. 5 of his 7 wins were against non-playoff teams. His record was 7-5. 5 of the wins were against non-playoff teams, and 1 was eliminating a team from the playoffs. If you guys remember the play where they walked it off against the Chargers and eliminated them in the last game of the season. And then they had 2 wins versus playoff teams, the Cowboys and the Eagles. They had 2 losses versus non-playoff teams and 3 losses against playoff teams. So you can kind of compare that with what I said about Antonio Pierce, but it's kind of similar, it's kind of similar numbers. You know what I mean? So
Right.
I think Bazakia did do a better job record-wise, but I think Antonio Pierce might be a better, I think he might be better in terms of the culture that he has established in that locker room.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
But I just kind of want to close with this. I want to remind everyone, again, I would pick Antonio Pierce if you can't land Harbaugh, but you cannot just let Harbaugh go to the Chargers. That's insane to me. And just being better than Josh McDaniels doesn't automatically mean that you're the best coaching candidate for the team going forward. And I think the players need to respect that ownership and the front office is going to do everything in their power to get them the best candidate that they think is going to run this team long term. Not just, all right, we were building something good right now and it was going somewhere good, but it's not eventually going to get us to the destination that we want to go. You have the floor, Mike.
Okay. I had to pull up the stats because I didn't come
pull
into this
them
with
up.
any notes. I didn't come into this with any real notes, but here's my difference between Bazakia and Gruden's team and, year 2 of Josh McDaniels' team and, of course, Antonio Pierce. The quarterback. Okay, the offense. John Gruden's quarterback and offense was able to, score a lot of points here and there. They were able to pass for a lot of yards because Derek Carr was good at it. Derek Carr was a good quarterback, a very fine quarterback, at times great, right? My issue with him was he wasn't consistent. Sometimes he'd be great. Sometimes he wouldn't be. But at any given game, he could throw for at least 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, right? Great game.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that team, Gruden with Bazakia, it was the offense that drove the team and the defense that held it back. And Bazakia was a special teams coordinator. He knew everybody on the team, but it's not like he's calling plays or nothing like that. Antonio Pierce isn't calling plays either. That's Patrick Graham. But Antonio Pierce is a defensive guy, and the defense carried the team this season, whereas the offense held it back. So the way that I feel about Antonio Pierce is his unit, his guys carried the team. When he instilled his culture, when he instilled, hey, player-led team, blah, 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 it's like that clearly was a big effect on the defense because that defense went from doing good and keeping the team in games to winning games. Chargers 63-21. Chiefs, we talked about it. You take away the 2 field goals that the offense was barely able to muster against the Chiefs. The Raiders still beat the Chiefs 14-13 with 2 defensive touchdowns. The defense won that game against the Chiefs. And I know you said the Chiefs haven't been that good this year. Watch them go and beat the Bills next week. Watch them. Okay?
I can't wait
It's still
to
the
do our
fucking Chiefs.
predictions.
Yeah. It's still the fucking Chiefs. So my thing here is This is the only stat I have to pull up because this is my big thing. The Raiders' offense was the 10th worst scoring offense in the NFL in 2023. Aiden O'Connell hobbled Josh Jacobs at the end of the season. But even when he was on the field, he was probably averaging like around 3 yards a carry. Davante Adams, like, he's great, but like with O'Connell at quarterback and a pretty much struggling run game, they could just double Davante Adams, and then it's like, okay, Jacoby Myers has a good game here and there. Once Josh McDaniels was let go, it's like the offense had to restart. It's just, you have this rookie quarterback. You never expected anything of him. And yet they still almost made the fucking playoffs with Antonio Pierce leading the way. You know, coming off of, they were like 3-5 when McDaniels was fired. Like, they almost made the playoffs. When I was completely out, I was just like, hey, let's see how it goes. Cool. Like, I hope Max Crosby gets 16 sacks or whatever it needs to be to beat the single season record. I hope Davante Adams gets 100 touchdowns. But, you know, I didn't expect playoffs, and yet we almost got it.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
So they almost made the playoffs, but you also had to keep into perspective the rest of your division. So the Chiefs, can we both agree that the Chiefs were in a down year? And if they just, you know, I don't think that the Chiefs are going to struggle like they did this year. You know, Kelsey is getting old, but I think that they're going to find offensive weapons or something to supplement Mahomes. Like, they still have Mahomes for a very long time, and that is the best quarterback in the NFL, arguably, that we've ever seen. Right? They still have Andy Reid.
Right.
Hall of Fame
but
coach.
They had a down year.
No question. Down year.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A down year for them. The Chargers, they had a down year, right? They have Justin Herbert. And yeah, Justin Herbert got hurt. They have some work that they need done, but if they get a guy like Harbaugh, you know, they are always going to be in the mix. Always. Sean Payton's Broncos, you know, they are currently like, they are going to reconstruct that team. It might take another year, but I'm telling you, they're going to be back on the way up before you even know it. Now, if you're the Raiders, do you take Antonio Pierce being an upgrade over Josh McDaniels? Like, Antonio Pierce hasn't even been a head coach for a team for an off-season program yet. And obviously, that will probably change in a year if he's the coach of the Raiders, and then we'll see how he prepares the team over the offseason. He might take some notes from when he played and, you know, take notes from what Josh McDaniels did and implement it in his own way. This is a guy that still is very inexperienced as a head coach. He's got to learn about what he needs in the draft during which round, all that stuff. And I guess it's just not a sure thing that if you just slightly improve, you know, the Raider team. And I know adding a quarterback that's significantly better than O'Connell will be probably the improvement that this team needs to make the playoffs, but it's not going to be that hard. You have to consider that it's not just a small scope thing. You guys play against the teams that I mentioned twice a year. They are going to be challenging you for those playoff spots. It's not just so easy as the Raiders just need to do their own thing and they'll make the playoffs. You have to keep in mind everyone else is also going to be making drastic changes and maybe even getting better, you know, surpassing the Raiders on how good they get. It's an arms race.
Yeah, that's how the division definitely feels. It's an arms race, unfortunately. I mean, once I realized, you know, Mahomes was Mahomes and Herbert was Herbert, I was like, this is just going to only make it harder. And then now we have Sean Payton with the Broncos, and they're clearly looking for a new quarterback. I mean, when they got Russell Wilson, I was like, that only makes it harder. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
but it actually didn't. Yeah, I get it. But I mean, the thing I had said a couple podcasts ago was, hey, I've seen these teams go into the draft, go into free agency, and try to, build themselves up for their opposition. So the Chargers, Broncos, and Raiders, they have all tried, attempted, and most of the time failed to build themselves in a way to compete with the Chiefs, right? You draft corners, you draft speedy wide receivers, you draft a good, running back, whatever, so that you can hopefully own the time of possession, be able to stop their wide receivers like Tyreek Hill at the time, or even have coverage linebackers that can cover Travis Kelce just a little bit, and pass rushers to get after Pat Mahomes, right? Clearly, pass rushers have been a big thing for the Raiders. They've tried and tried again at corner. They're finally looking good there. But, as far as first-round picks that they've tried, not so good. Safeties, everything in between, right? And then I mentioned it again recently, but you have teams like the Bills and the Bengals and Chiefs who are building themselves up just to counter them, right? But I just can't help but think sometimes when teams are zigging, maybe it's time to zag, And, if the Chargers do get Harbaugh, that's another offensive-minded coach in the division with Andy Reid and Sean Payton. And then you have this guy in Antonio Pierce who's just an absolute culture-building, defensive-minded coach. But again, the defense is winning them games out here with a really shitty offense. The mentality that I've had recently was, man, these other teams, they're like these air raid teams, quarterback, wide receiver, pass heavy teams, right? With these great offensive minded coaches. Now, you can argue that the rules nowadays don't really favor this mindset, but if the Raiders can become the bully, right? That could be, and that goes with culture and buying in and all of that. If they can become that, you're not going to out hustle us. You're not going to out fight us. If they could become that team, just the absolute scrappy monster of a bully, when they get that quarterback, I think, you look at the Chiefs on the down years because they're not a bully right now. They're just not. They're smart, they're well coached, but they're not a bully. That's for sure, right? The Chargers are definitely not a bully. They're soft as fuck. No offense, but with Harbaugh, that'll change. But, and the Broncos are going through it right now, but, I don't know. I think you can instill that Raider mystique and maybe something positive comes out of that. And it's a maybe, but to me, it's like you see some of these teams like the Ravens, the Niners, I'd say the Bengals back when Burrow was healthy, but those are teams that are like, they're bullies, You're going to face them and they're just going to beat the shit out of you. The Cowboys were kind of that team until this week. And for years, the Chiefs were one of those teams, but now not so much. I just can't help but think that Pierce can make the Raiders a bully. And once you get that quarterback, it's like, you don't even need to be scrappy. That's just an added bonus, But if their defense can stop these offenses paired with a good offense, that should lead to success. Yeah, it's going to be hard with this division. It doesn't make it any easier that next season we're facing the AFC North. But
I've got something. All right, so I just want to ask you this, and I feel like this is very important. What is the guarantee? Because, all right, you're saying that just as long as the Raider defense stays as it is and they add the quarterback, that things will improve. What is the guarantee that Antonio Pierce is going to bring in the right quarterback?
Well, it's not exactly a guarantee. It really comes down to their scouts, their scouting department, the general manager, right? And then also the offensive coordinator that he brings in. And that's been Sorry, there was just a live tweet right here. That's been a it was about the Raiders GM, so I was like, whoa. That's been a concern for me is, hey, who does Antonio Pierce know out there? Like, does he have the connections? Like you mentioned, Harbaugh does. I'd have to imagine Antonio Pierce doesn't quite have the connections, but maybe other guys on the team do. Maybe it's just a matter of reaching out to as many candidates as possible and getting him in there for interviews.
Mm-hmm.
There is a rumor, which we'll get to the coaching rumors, but there's a very hot rumor right now that I actually really like as far as an offensive coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's what it comes down to.
The reason I ask this question is because it could be a very realistic, scenario in which the Raiders decide to keep Antonio Pierce as their head coach. Their defense still plays well, and they draft a quarterback, and the quarterback is not good enough.
Right.
That's a very realistic, scenario. And what you're hoping for in that scenario is that the quarterback just shows promise long term, or some sort of improvement, right? Because I think we figured out over this season, Aiden O'Connell is just not a starting quarterback in the NFL. He's a backup.
At least for now, he's definitely a backup. He could still, I still think he could progress into being a starter, but not next season.
Well, the thing is, he has weapons now. He had Josh Jacobs, Devontae Adams. Who's the other receiver? Jacoby Myers.
He has weapons, but you're throwing him out there in week 7 or whatever, telling him, hey, good luck with a rookie offensive coordinator. And they had to, revamp and change the offensive scheme mid-season. Essentially, Aiden O'Connell didn't get an off-season. He's just a rookie getting thrown out there with a new playbook. Hey, here we go. Run these plays. That's why they were low scoring for so long. It's because they had nothing on the playbook that he could memorize. Right? They had to dumb it down for him, probably. That's tough. And I was going to mention this. As far as Antonio Pierce, okay, let's just go game by game. Raiders versus Giants, they kill him, right? I was at the game, 30-6. Raiders versus Jets, 2 shitty offenses, right? Daniel Jones got hurt in the Giants game, but then the Jets, we know the Jets. 16-12, Sunday Night Football. Defensive matchup, Raiders win. Dolphins versus Raiders, the first real test. Raiders lose 20-13, okay? Very close-fought game. The defense kept them in it the whole way. Chiefs versus Raiders at Las Vegas. The Chiefs kick our ass, 31-17, okay? That was the big loss, I'd say. Vikings, Raiders in Las Vegas, obviously 3-0. Tough. I think that's on the offense. When it's 3-0, you limited the opposing team to 3 points, and yet you can score nothing. That's on the offense. That is not on Antonio Pierce to me. Chargers, Raiders, we already know 63-21. Raiders, Chiefs 20-14. Defense won the game. Raiders versus Colts 23-20. I would say that was. We talked about the penalties a couple weeks ago, but also I'd say the offense could have been better, specifically O'Connell. And then Raiders versus Broncos end the season. They killed the Broncos 27-14. Here's the big thing for me. Besides that Chiefs game that the Raiders lost in Vegas, first matchup of the season against the Chiefs, very well-coached team, right? And I think a big part of winning and losing games is game planning. And I think the Chiefs are very good at that. Other than that game, the other losses that the Raiders had were within one possession with the 10th worst scoring offense. And that I talked about Pete Carroll earlier. It's like one-score games, right? If Antonio Pierce is given the right guys and given the offseason to go get the right guys, he knows what the team needs. Champ Kelly knows what the team needs. You bring in a new coach, it's like, yeah, let's just try it out. Just like Josh McDaniels did the first year. Let's keep Derek Carr. Let's try it out. Yeah, let's bring in Devontae Adams. Sure. Well, then it doesn't work out, and then, now we have to rebuild. If Harbaugh comes in and they don't make the playoffs, rebuild. Then Max Crosby's requesting a trade.
Yeah, I can see that. All right, here's the thing. At this point, I kind of want to see Antonio Pierce stay, because like I said, it's not my team. If I was a Raider fan, I would absolutely, I'd be pounding the table. Jim Harbaugh now, I think you know, because I know Harbaugh's backstory and everything. Like, well, I don't know his entire story, but at least like for the past 10 years, past 15 years, what Harbaugh has been able to do. Um, I would like to see Antonio Pierce be able to, like, I just want to see what it looks like, and then we'll either have the discussion of, hey Josh, uh, your take looks stupid as fuck. Antonio Pierce just led this team to the playoffs. We have our franchise quarterback, or it's going to be, man, how did the Raiders just not pursue Harbaugh? It's a hard decision, I think. It's,
Right.
so I want to see how it plays out. And I want to see, all right, let's just say Antonio Pierce does get retained on the Raiders. I want to see how it looks going forward. I'm very curious. So I at least have that to be excited for if they do keep him.